Welcome to episode 31 of the Ikario podcast. Today we're talking about playing the long game. We're talking about the things that you can do that accrue greater and greater benefits over the long time. And we will also talk about why these types of things create such an outsized advantage. And as always, we'll try to make this as practical and actionable as possible. Now, you can find the show notes with links to anything we mentioned during this episode and also with a place to leave comments by going to ikario.com/031 for episode 31. So that's ikario.com/031. And with that, let's get right to it.
Hello and welcome to the Ikario podcast, where we help you break free from the human zoo, optimize your life and become a force to be reckoned with your hosts once again, myself, Ollie, and here he is.
And I am Shane, and welcome to the podcast. So today we're talking about playing the long game. If you have listened to previous episodes, you've probably heard us mention this or this kind of thing once or twice. This is really about the kind of becoming a force to be reckoned with part of what we're about on this podcast. So to explain what this is about, right? Playing the long game, it is kind of one of these core principles of, let's say, the Ikario way, right? If we ever get around to compiling like the Ikario way or like the creed or whatever, playing the long game will have to be part of it. And to set this up, I just want to make it extra clear, like what I'm talking about here in principle before we get into the practicals. So if we think about growth, right, we're after growth, we're after personal growth. And most growth happens almost imperceptibly slowly, which is to say that from one day to the next, you can't really tell, whether I've been to the gym or not, let's say, right? This is like, even if I'm going to the gym with the express goal of growing my muscles, like from one day to the next, from one training session to the next, you can't tell.
Although people can often be convinced of the opposite. If you're not, especially if you've not been to the gym for ages or even ever.
They're swaggering out.
They're like in 2 or 3 sessions, they're like, you know what, actually, yeah, my arms are starting to, I'm just like, I'm sorry, I don't want to piss on your bonfire, I really don't. But 2 or 3 gym sessions, I mean, even with newbie gains considered, it's unlikely, but either way.
So right there, that's one of the reasons why there's there's value in playing the long game, and why because a lot of people will fail along the way because everybody wants instant results basically, and so when those don't materialize, that's where a lot of people drop off.
Yeah.
But there are there are multiple types of growth that all happen imperceptibly slowly. And I want to make a distinction between 2 of them here, because one of them would be linear growth and the other would be compounding growth. If you think about linear growth, it would be something like your hair growing, right? And this is a great example that I think we have all seen, right? From one day to the next, you're not looking in the mirror going, oh, my hair grew since yesterday. But clearly, at some point, you look in the mirror and you go, oh, I really need a haircut.
Yeah.
And that is how this weird thing of like the imperceptible growth leads to a big difference given enough time. But with your hair, we're looking at more or less linear growth. I mean, eventually it drops off as well, but more or less linear growth. And that can still be beneficial. So if you do something that helps you grow as a person in a linear fashion, that can still be beneficial. But when we're talking about playing the long game and the outsized benefits of playing the long game, we're talking about compounding results, where basically the results build up on each other and accelerate over time. Now, there's a famous example of this because it's hard to grasp just how much of a difference compounding results make. And there's a famous example of this where, I was told this as, someone did something for the emperor or for the king or whatever, and the king said, I'll give you any reward you ask for, I'll shower you in gold or whatever. And he said, here's what I want from you. Take a chessboard and place a grain of rice on the first tile, and then 2 grains of rice on the next tile and 4 on the next, and you just double at each tile. And that's the amount of rice I want. That's all I want. And the emperor goes, oh, okay, you just want some rice? No problem, right?
I'll give you rice, mate.
Yeah.
That's fine. I got plenty of that.
Yeah. And of course, what happens is that this doubling on the final tile, so there's 64 tiles on a chessboard. On the final tile, you have like 18 quintillion grains of rice, which is like trillions of tons of rice, which is about 2,000 times the amount of rice that is produced in the entire world every year.
So it turns out it was a tall order.
It was a pretty tall order.
Turns out he was asking for
and he basically bankrupted the king.
Right? He was asking for a country-breaking amount of rice. What a greedy bastard.
Yeah. So, but it just shows, right, that the thing is that the human brain is not great at figuring this out. We can't understand, because even if you've heard of this and you're like, oh yeah, hold on, this is exponential growth. It must be a lot. You know, even if you know that, you try to take it into account. You go, well, I guess there's like billions of grains of rice on the last tile. No, there's literally there's billions of grains of rice is already more than you can imagine, but it's so much more than that, right? Now, that's a form of very extreme compounding growth. It doubles every time. That's very, very extreme compounding growth. But the same principle applies to much smaller kind of rates of increase. What compounding growth has in common is that, just like with the doubling, it grows larger every time based on how much it grew last time. Right? It's almost that's basically the growth compounding. So another example that is easy to come across is from, like, when you learn about saving money and investing. This is an example that you probably find of putting money into a safe investment account of some kind, and the number that's always given is 7%, right? You can expect like 7% annual returns, meaning that if I put $1,000 into a savings account, at the end of the year, I still have $1,000, or maybe they've taken off a bit of a fee and maybe there's a bit of negative interest, but let's just say I still have $1,000 at the end of a year, right? If I put it in an investment account, and let's say it's just like an index fund or something, so I'm not making investment decisions, and this is just kind of being invested, and I make a 7% gain, that basically means that by the end of the year I have $1,070, right? I've gained 7%. And those extra $70, I reinvest those, or I keep them in the investment account, and that makes it compounding. So on year one, I'm earning the 7% on $1,000, and on year two, I'm earning a 7% on $1,070. And again, that's something that when you think about it, it's like, well, that's not very exciting, right? I waited a year to turn $1,000 into $1,070. But because it's compounding, we also underestimate the effects. So if we compare like three scenarios, in one case, you just do nothing. You just spend your money as you earn it. In scenario B, you save $100 every month. So every month you put $100 into savings account. In scenario C, you put $100 every month into an investment account that accrues a 7% return. Now, if we look at this into the future, obviously, so 10 years in the future, let's say, if you've just spent all your money, you have $0 saved. Okay. In scenario B, after 10 years, you have $12,000 saved. And in your investment account, you have $16,500 at this point. And so, okay, that's nice, right? That's an extra $4,500, not bad. If we keep going, after 20 years, in a savings account, you would have $24,000. And in this investment account, you'd have $49,000. And in 30 years, you would have saved $36,000, but your investment account would be at about $113,000 with 7-year annual returns. And so here again, we can see, right, what initially looks like, I can take it or leave it, 7% seems so small, doesn't even matter. But over years and over decades, it compounds. And one of the things that gets us about it is that it compounds, like the results become more and more outsized on the tail end. So in the last 3 years of those 30 years, you're making significantly more money than in the first, 10 plus years.
Right.
And that is one of the things where we really underestimate the effect. And again, it's something that gives people who play the long game on something that compounds an advantage, because most people give up before they get into that tail end of really maximizing returns. Most people will fall off or exit the game in some way before they get there. And just to be clear, this is not about investing. What I'm talking about here is not about investing. I'm just using this as an example because it's a very simple example where you can suddenly see, oh shit, yeah, the difference between $36,000 and $120,000 in my account is pretty significant. And I'm only using this example to show, because what I'm talking about is you can get this kind of compounding long-term difference in other areas of life too. And what it always has in common is that early on, growth is almost imperceptible. And it seems like whether I do this or not, maybe it doesn't matter. And later on, those who've played a long game have outsized opportunities and benefits over everyone who didn't. And it's very hard to close that gap, right? It's like later on, again, at the end of this, at the end of the 30 years, if you're trying to close the gap, if you're trying to close the difference, you have to come up with like 100K, right?
Right.
It's quite difficult to do from a standing start. So let's bring this into personal growth and habits and stuff. We've already talked about some of this stuff in the How to Get Your Shit Together series. So for anyone who's unfamiliar with that, there's like the first half dozen episodes of this podcast. It's what we call the How to Get Your Shit Together series, with kind of the simplest, most actionable things you can do to improve your life in the most leveraged way, basically.
Intensely practical.
Yeah. And we've mentioned stuff there that has compounding effects, or where it really helps, the long game type stuff. So we talked about sleep, for example, right? And it's like, even if you're just mildly sleep deprived, over time, this really screws you up in a very big way. And, your food habits also have a compounding effect over time to some degree. And I'm not going to revisit those. So instead, I'm going to go into 3 specific habits that I think are good examples of the long game. And I'm going to talk about how to implement them in such a way that you get most of this benefit.
Cool.
So the first one is reading books. So if you read a book this week, right, you'll learn a couple of interesting things, but it's probably not going to change your life. And so where you can see then, the day-to-day change from whether you're someone who reads books or not is not that clear. But if you think about it, like 10 years from now, if you've made a habit of reading books regularly, 10 years from now, it will very likely have changed your life. And the way you see the world, the level of knowledge and understanding that you have about things going on in the world is going to be hugely different to someone who didn't read for 10 years. And also, if you think about it in terms of like media consumption, right? The mainstream is, I wonder actually what the numbers are, but I imagine that like 90% of media consumption probably happens in the form of things like tweets and TikToks and things like that, right? So we have extremely small, extremely shallow, extremely short, like spikes of entertainment camouflaged as information. And if you compare someone spending years consuming that kind of stuff to someone spending years reading books, that is where you have this kind of advantage where you just find yourself, and it's kind of hard to put this into words, but it's like you just find yourself being able to run circles around these people, right? You find yourself in a position where it's like, oh man, it is hard to close this gap now, right? The best advice I can give you is sit down and start reading. Let's talk again in 10 years, So reading books is one of those.
Yep.
And this is one of the reasons why I try to encourage everyone to read books, basically. That's like every time. And I think I have successfully, I've seen some people go from not having a reading habit to having a reading habit after hanging out with me. And I was like, that's a win. That's a win. If I do nothing else in my life, I've already done good,
Yeah, you've already ticked the box. So like, I think we may have mentioned this on a podcast at some other point already, but your reading habit right now, what does that look like? Is that more sort of audiobooks, or do you carve out, say, 30 minutes a day? Do you make it a ritual? Do you make it a thing that you track? Like,
It's not like a fixed ritual, but what I will do is like almost every day, probably let's say 6 out of 7 days, I spend an hour walking and listening to either audiobooks or podcasts. And so that's how I do a lot of my reading. And then in between that, or like let's say aside from that, it really depends just on my interest, right? So I tend to get interested in something, and then maybe I'm like reading several hours a day until I've gone through a couple of books, and then something else becomes important again, and so on. But what I have consistently is I would say that I'm spending at least 45 minutes, I would say typically 45 to 90 minutes a day walking and consuming long form content. And at least half of that would be books.
Got you.
Yeah.
And what about note taking, like with audiobooks?
Yeah, so I do like bookmarks, so like you can, or clips or whatever they're called, right? So that when something's interesting, I will bookmark that so that later I can go through. I always buy the audiobook and the ebook, so that afterwards I can review the ebook. And I don't always make notes. This is something I want to change, actually. I want to get to the point where I'm always making notes about at least good books I read. That's something I need a better system for that, because every system I've tried so far has basically failed, or I haven't done it consistently. But right now I would say that maybe on 1 in every 3 books or so I read, I take notes, and I'd like to up that for sure. And yeah, basically I often read a book by listening to it and then review it and do notes by going through the ebook.
Got you.
Now, when we talk about reading also, let me add more to this. Like, here's like the turbo boost on how to get even more out of a reading habit. I think it's not just about reading, but it's also about how and what you read. So let's talk about what you read. If you're like in the self-development space, then there's books that come up that become bestsellers that like everybody reads, you know, where typically a book will come up and then the author of that book will be on the Tim Ferriss podcast and on the Joe Rogan podcast and on just every other podcast you can name, right? And it's like everybody reads that book. And already, look, if you're someone who, like, shockingly, most people are non-book readers. So already, if you just read books at all, you're already like in an exclusive club of people. But within that club of people, and if you think about it, like the niche of self-development interested people, right? There are some books that, yeah, everybody in that niche reads. And it's definitely good to read those, but I think you can gain a further advantage by reading deeper. So instead of having read the one best-selling book about habits and the one best-selling book about sleep and the one best-selling book about nutrition and so on, right? So you've kind of gotten the one sample from every vertical. Like, go deeper. And if you're really interested in, yes, let's say sleep, then read the bestseller and then read the other one and then read the one that's kind of weird, right? The one that claims the opposite. Like, seek out the contrarian views. That can be something that gives you lots and lots of depth that most people don't have. And then another thing you could do is like read some of the classics, right? So, you know, everybody's referencing the Stoics. It's very trendy, basically. Well, read some of the Stoics, like go to the source, right? That's what most people, again, if you think about it, competitive advantages, most people don't go there. They will only listen to or read the author's referencing.
They'll read some Ryan Holiday bullshit, like 365 Stoic meditation, some watered down. Read Marcus Aurelius's writing yourself. You know, it's actually, to be fair, it's Ryan Holiday's done a fairly good job of almost modernizing it, but I do think you lose a bit of something.
I think he's doing a good job of like, yeah, bringing the stuff to people who would otherwise not find it probably.
Yeah,
but I agree. Then go to the source. Yeah.
Yeah, you read what directly, like the letters from Seneca to his mate Lucilius or something, and it's just like, even the way he structures his sentences and the words he uses and stuff is just like, this is very different, but it's a lot more rich and it's a lot more challenging. It's not like a fast food kind of self-development stuff. It's like deep philosophy. It feels,
And yeah, I think
yourself.
you definitely get some benefits of like deliberately digging deeper there. And another thing, so to make this very specific, right, to add to this, here's what I think is a reading power move, is to read the contrarians. And what I mean is that, like, read a whole book, at least one, that is written by someone who opposes your worldview in something. And this is something I've done repeatedly. So let me give you some examples of how I've done this. So I was really interested in nutrition for a while, and I read a lot of books about it. And I read books. So where I ended up is that, so for ethical reasons already, I'm a plant eater, right? So I try not to eat animal products. And that's mainly for ethical reasons. So it's not for health reasons primarily. But when I got into this and I started reading all these books on nutrition, the first books I read on this were very strongly advocating this as well. We're basically saying, yes, plant-based seems to be the healthiest way to eat. And I got to a point where I was very solid in my conviction that this is the right choice. But then this also made me skeptical because it's like, oh, it happens to be the right choice is the thing I already did. That's convenient. So
lucky that.
Yeah. And so I wanted to know, what are the arguments that the other side makes? So if you go to someone who writes about, keto, where it's like eat animal fat and eggs and stay away from vegetables pretty much, it's like, what are their arguments? I want to understand that viewpoint. And so I did read a couple of books written by people who essentially on the other side of that idea, because I really want to understand their arguments. And I wanted to get to a point where if I listen to a debate, for example, between someone who's, a vegan and someone who's a keto person, I want to actually understand what they're saying. And I want to get to the point where basically I know the studies they're referencing, and I know, so that if someone's just standing there going, well, this study showed that XYZ, it's like, I have deeper information. Like, I know that study, I've seen that study, I know the flaws in that study, or I know how it was designed or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't just have to believe you anymore. And yeah, this was very useful for me to really understand, to have a much more solid understanding of where I'm standing in terms of my diet. That's one of the more recent examples. Also, when it comes to things like, obviously, I've read a lot of books about productivity and about life optimization and all this kind of stuff. But I also occasionally read books from people who are like, outside of that sphere. And it's like, stop trying to be so productive all the time. Stop trying to, this whole hustle culture nonsense. Trying to read books that are basically saying, no, this is all nonsense, right? This is all a scam, basically.
Yeah.
I want to understand what that viewpoint is. And sometimes it changes my mind, and sometimes I'm just like, okay, I understand your argumentation. I'm still over here. I still, I haven't moved camp, so to speak, but I want to understand what the other side is saying.
Fair.
And that is, I think, that is a power move when it comes to expanding your knowledge base, because most people, well, we don't generally seek out disagreement, right? We like to get confirmation. We like to have our little tribe where everyone agrees. Plus, algorithmically, we're all stuck in a bubble where everything basically agrees with us, right? And where at best we're shown some kind of a straw man caricature version of the other side, where like the only exposure you have to the other side is the people on your side dunking on them, right? Being like, oh, look at this idiot who disagrees with us, right? Mm. And so we basically don't seek out views that counter our own, let alone read entire books about them. And so if you can really do that, I think this is an amazing way to like step up your game in terms of knowledge and worldview. And again, like I said, if you do this once, it's probably an interesting experiment. If you make a habit of doing this, then 10 years from now, 20 years from now, the way you view the world and the way you can use your understanding to navigate the world is just going to be next level compared to most people and what media consumption has done to most people at that point.
Got you. So you mentioned obviously reading, but you talked about how to make reading like a power practice and some suggestions there. But in the context of the topic of playing the long game, what does that look like? Does that look like, I don't know, you read 10 pages a day, 15 pages a day, you read for 15 minutes, 30 minutes? Have you ever seen any advice out there that helps turn this into a long-term habit, like play the long game with reading, establish a long-term reading habit?
Yeah, for sure. It's all about establishing a habit, right? That's the only way in which you're going to get the long game benefits is if you do it consistently for long enough. And so you have to do it without having to think about it, without having to make a huge effort. Now, in terms of like how much you should do, I think that, as long as, like, I think ideally, it could probably work that you, let's say, every day half an hour I'm reading and it's like in my calendar or whatever. But ideally, you end up reading more than that minimum because you're interested and engaged, right? So if you're kind of sitting there counting pages, how much are you remembering? If you're like, oh, this is page 10, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
that seems like it's not the greatest way to read. And there, if that's the case, is like, first of all, read things you enjoy reading. Start there. Read things you enjoy reading. And I think you can spend time reading things you enjoy reading for quite a while until you start feeling some of those benefits. And hopefully your curiosity then leads you to read more. So I think that it's useful to establish a habit that makes sure you do a minimum, but you basically want to encourage reading in yourself, right? You want to be doing this because you want to, essentially.
Yeah. I often wonder when it comes to reading, how much that's tied in with the temperament of the person. Because like in terms of, you've got like things like the Big 5 personality test and stuff, and one of them is like openness. And yeah, most people I know, they're not massive readers. Yeah. And usually if I think about, is this person open or curious? Not necessarily. They kind of just, they're doing their own thing. They've got their philosophy on life and stuff, and then that's fine. But yeah, I wonder if openness is something you can intentionally cultivate through practices like reading.
I imagine so. Yeah, I imagine so. But like I say, I think that's where, again, I would always, like, anyone who struggles with this, anyone who feels like, well, this is a drag, I would really encourage you to read. Give yourself permission to read whatever you want, and worry about reading the good stuff and all this stuff that I talked about here later, right? Because if you now go, okay, they said I should read the classics and I should read contrarian viewpoints, and so then you go read some book in some old-timey language, and there's this other thing written by someone you hate, and you're like, well, this is not fun.
Yeah.
And then, like, don't jump right there, right? Because also this is a long game. The idea is that you do this for a long, long time, and it levels up your life in ways that, like 10 years from now, right now, I'm struggling to how do I make it clear how valuable this is? Like, do it 10 years from now, you'll be like, damn, yeah, he was right. So
yeah, in the long game, it's more about sort of just becoming a reader.
Yeah. And so if you have to spend a few years just reading books that you just enjoy, and just read fiction that you just love, and then start bringing in some nonfiction and start doing this more as a pursuit of knowledge type thing, that's not a waste of time. All right, so that was habit number 1, long game number 1. Read, be the person who reads, and who reads with these extra turbo boosts we mentioned. That is, in the future version of you, if you do this, is going to be an absolute badass. The second one is meditation. Now, this probably comes to no surprise, right? Meditation has gone pretty mainstream. And also, I want to be clear that meditation is a habit that I haven't been pursuing as consistently as I'd like to. It's something that I've been doing like on and off for a very long time. But I wish I could tell you that I meditated at least 20 minutes every day, but it's not true. But I think that even in my relatively inconsistent meditation habit, it has already helped me a lot. And it's also one of those things, I think that it's one of those things where, for sure, if you sit down and meditate right now, maybe it makes you feel good, maybe it's just kind of eh. But if you're like 10 years from now, whether you've meditated every day or not, is going to make a difference.
Yeah.
And if you think about it with meditation, I think about it as like, well, first of all, I'd like to refer to a book which is called Altered Traits. And I always forget the authors. Daniel Goleman and Richard J. Davidson wrote a book called Altered Traits, which is about where they basically hooked up a bunch of machinery to all kinds of people who meditate, both like beginner, like novice, intermediate, and super long-term meditators. And the whole book is basically about the ways in which meditation has like lasting, measurable, it changes your brain type effects. And it shows also very clearly that there are benefits to long, like people who've meditated for 20, 30 years they still have different brains from people who meditated half as much, right? And it really shows that very solidly, like literally it changes your brain, and it has various obviously positive effects on a person's it basically has both. It changes, it can change your state, but it can also change traits. So the state change would be, okay, I did a meditation session, I feel more relaxed, but that's transient. But then it also has like really solid, lasting trait changes. And you can think of it like, imagine that you have like two life paths ahead of you, right? In one of them, you don't have a meditation habit, in the other one you do. I think, you really have to think of it in terms of 10 years from now, because in the next weeks or months, is it going to make a huge difference? I don't think so. But 10 years from now, how much more tension and like anxiety and stress that you experience in the non-meditating path? And how different are your relationships to people, right? In the non-meditating path, where you don't have that window into your own behavior, where you don't have like that observer perspective. Oh, this thing made me angry, and now I have an urge to lash out at someone, but I'm not going to, right? Mm-hmm. That's the kind of thing you can gain from meditation. And compounded over many years, how will that change how you relate to people? And I think that, it's one of those things that maybe on a 10-year time span, it makes a difference between whether you're still married or you got divorced, because it's like so many little things. And it's very hard to say, well, if you do this every day, you'll gain this advantage and therefore you'll get a promotion and you'll earn more money or something, right? It's like, it's not that direct. It's more like
stretch.
Thousands of little things that change that could lead to an even bigger ultimate result,
The interesting thing though is with something so subtle, it happens so subtly and gradually that eventually you don't. The change is so, like for example, I've meditated since I was maybe like 16, and am I anxiety free all the time? Fuck no. Am I happy all the time? No. Am I sometimes distracted? Yes, I am. So if someone says to me, "Did meditation change your life?" I'd be like, "Mate, I've got no idea." To tell you the truth, I don't know, because the thing is that it's been so long, and the changes have been so subtle. And the practice has been so subtle. It's been just a background presence pretty much in my life. That if I was to, I don't know, but I often wonder, has it done anything? But then I think, if I saw an alternative timeline where Ollie has never meditated before, God only knows, I could be a wreck. I could be a pisshead. I could be addicted to alcohol. You know what I mean? Who knows? Who knows, right? But it's just, but the point I'm making is that, some of these things, they're so subtle, but they put you on a different trajectory altogether. But it's not that when you're on this trajectory down the line, you're like, oh my God, thank God. You don't feel that relief because the effects are so subtle across time. You just live this life now, and you still have your problems, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't worthwhile, because if you could see the other timeline, even for 5 minutes, you'd be like, holy shit, thank God I did that.
Yeah, and it's impossible to know, right? You never have the control of you who didn't do it in the same time, right? With the same life events happening and so on. But yeah, it changes things where you can't imagine what it's like. Like the thing I just described before, right? Something I've definitely gotten out of meditation is just a slight distance, or this observer perspective, where I can see things happening within me, rather than having them happen to me as the subject. I can gain that perspective more often. Now, I can't imagine anymore what what would it be like not to have that? Well, I don't know, right? It's like so strange to even think about this.
Yeah, that is one thing. The introspective, your introspective power. That's true. That is one thing I do possess that I've had for a while that I just think is just a design feature of Ollie. I'm like, oh, it's just normal. So like I met one of my best friends, met her sister recently, went for a drink, and I noticed on the walk over there already, I was like, oh, I'm nervous about this. Why is that? So we were just chatting for a couple of hours, then all of a sudden my state changes, and all out of the blue. And she's like, what happened? And then I introspected, and it took me very, very little time to do this. She was like, I've noticed there was a drop in your energy. Is everything okay? Did I do anything? I was like, give me a moment. I was like, okay. So I'm thinking that we've spent a couple of hours together, and I'm anticipating there's going to be a lull in the conversation and a point where you're going to basically just, you're going to not want to be here, and you're going to want to leave, and you're like, oh my God, you'll sort of like discover that I'm not very interested or something. That's what my mind was saying.
Yeah.
But I wasn't aware of it in the moment, but when she sort of picked up on the energy shift, I could introspect, take a deep breath and be like, what's really going on? And then see what kind of thoughts I'm having, and then be like, oh, wow. Because that's the thing. Non-meditators, people who've never meditated or they've never really looked within and seen anything of interest, it's like their thoughts are just right here.
Yeah.
They're like, bang, they are their thoughts.
Exactly. It's not even, the thoughts aren't even here. It's just like, I'm my thoughts.
Yeah, they don't use the language. They wouldn't even use the language of, I'm having this thought, that. They'll just sort of have the thought react, and you know what I mean? So I guess if anything, the meditation just gives you that distance that just becomes who you are.
Yeah.
You start relating to yourself differently.
Yeah. And another thing I want to add to the meditation, because there's also many different schools of meditation, lots of different types of meditation you might do that all can be very beneficial. And some of them might not do all of the stuff that we just talked about. But I think that one important thing, it's almost like the easiest solution is to just sit and do nothing. And I think that basically anyone who meditates, I encourage you to do at least some of your meditation in this way, where you just sit and do nothing, so that your meditation doesn't feel like work. Like your meditation shouldn't always feel like another thing that you work on. You know, here I am working on my awareness and working on my empathy and God knows what, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, no, just sit here and do absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Shout out to Naval Ravikant for that suggestion. What does he say? I think we might do something. I think I might do a challenge of this. What did he in the podcast?
Yeah. So his thing is like, he says for 60 days, spend 60 minutes every day just sitting there doing nothing, and you just. And it's basically just a non-directed meditation, right? You sit and you don't try to focus on your breath. You don't try to calm your mind, nothing. You just sit there with your eyes closed and let happen whatever happens.
Cool. But I didn't know it was for 60 days. I might be eating my words.
Yeah.
On week number 2.
But I think that doing this kind of thing is very beneficial, especially like in our hectic lives, right? Where we constantly have stuff to do. Like we're constantly doing.
Yeah.
I think there as well, you can accrue some serious benefits by being like the only person around who just has this quiet at least once a day, you know. All right, so that's meditation. Another classic example of stuff that the benefits accrue in a kind of compounding, very, very, very long-term way. And the third one is perhaps the most Shane one of these.
Wait, let me just see if I can guess. It's either going to be it's introspective writing.
Well, that would be
in some
I was
respect.
thinking about that one.
Well, yeah, okay. I've drawn a blank.
No, it's not introspective writing. Although you're right that I was like, I can't do introspective writing again. Like, I've mentioned this so often. No, it's basically asking questions.
Hey, see, I wasn't anticipating that.
So it's making a habit of asking questions. Now, if you're hearing this, you'll probably go, well, I ask questions, whatever. What is he on about? So let me clarify this a little bit. 2 ways in which we can get at what I mean by this. And this is where this becomes a long game, right? Again, this is something, if you develop this habit, you are going to be running circles around other people who don't do this in the long term, 10, 20 years from now, right? So ask questions that reveal your ignorance and ask questions to follow your curiosity. Those are two things that get to what I mean by this. So let's talk about the first one, right? Make a habit of asking questions that reveal your ignorance about a topic, reveal your ignorance about whatever. Make that a habit. And now think about yourself in different social contexts. Around your friends, around family, around when your boss is around, whatever, right? Think about you in different social contexts. Think about how comfortable are you in that context to ask a question that basically says, what is this, right? Someone mentions a thing, you go, what does that mean? How comfortable are you doing that? Because what I found is that most people are very uncomfortable doing this and avoid doing this. Most people, if they're sitting in a meeting and someone, uses a term they've never heard before, they will just sit there and the meeting will just keep going. And maybe after the meeting, they will remember, oh shit, what was that thing? And they'll look it up. But they will not ask anyone, and they will not ask during the meeting. Because what they're thinking is, oh my God, everybody else knows this. If I say, hey, what's this thing? Everybody's going to be like, oh, you're an idiot. Meanwhile, there's like 5 other people in that meeting who go, what the fuck is that? Right? And they're all sitting there, not asking the question and being afraid and thinking that everybody else knows, right? In some cases, the idiot with the laser pointer who said the thing doesn't know what it means. And everybody's sitting there going, oh, I guess everybody else knows what it means, right? Anyway, that's my point, right? Most people avoid ever asking a question that reveals their ignorance because they feel like they're in some kind of a competition with people. And, if I show that I don't know something, that'll be the end of it.
Yeah.
And this is a terrible habit. And what I'm suggesting is literally in that situation, think of the situation where you're most uncomfortable. In that situation, you basically blurt out the question, what is that? What do you mean by that? What is that word? I've never heard that word before. Okay? You make a habit of that. And now you probably think, and make a habit of like confidently and casually revealing your ignorance by asking questions.
Man, that reminds me, the first ever guy I ever met who did that really left an impression on me. He must have been, it was kind of Socratic in a way, in the way that he would just, we'd just be hanging out, just in a friend group, and one person says something, and I can't think of a concrete example right now, but he'd have this habit where he'd be like, what do you mean? Where did that come from? And he would almost seem confrontational about it because it was so uncommon. It's just usually the case that someone would say something that's like, oh yeah. It's like, what do you mean? Oh, but I mean that. So how did you reach that conclusion? Why would you think that? Oh, I read it here. Where? Okay. I'm just checking. Yeah. That seems a bit unusual. And it's like, I think it's, it certainly didn't have the negative effect that people would have thought it did.
For sure. This is the thing, right? And I really like, if anyone, people listening here, it's very likely, maybe you're not even aware of it, but it's very likely that you have a habit of not asking questions that could reveal your ignorance. And I'm asking you, reverse that. Start asking those questions casually and confidently. And the things that you imagine will happen, where everyone else goes, what an idiot, right? Everybody starts like talking about you like you're an idiot. Or whatever you think about, these things will not happen. What will happen much more often than you think is like you'll hear other people breathe a sigh of relief, right? Because finally someone's asking this question.
Yeah, I wonder if this has something to do with school, because we've all been there. We ask a question or we confidently proclaim an answer at school and it wasn't the right one.
We get laughed at.
And then you get laughed at.
Yeah.
And then you're your most impressionable time of your life,
Yeah.
I wonder if that has something to do with it.
Yeah. But yeah, the negative consequences you imagine, they're basically not going to happen. And my attitude towards this is that there is basically an infinity of things I don't know. And I'm well aware of that. I'm well aware of that, like, whatever knowledge I've managed to accrue over my lifetime so far is like a tiny little pinprick of light in an infinity of darkness of things that I don't know. And I know, and all I have is like a tiny little flashlight to learn one new thing at a time. And I know that anywhere I point my flashlight, there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff that I don't know yet.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, if you start to talk to me about something and I don't know this, that is just not surprising at all. It's just like, oh, this is one of the infinite things I don't know, right? And I think this is very, very important. Like briefly think about this image that I just painted, right? It's like tiny pinprick of knowledge in an absolute vastness of ignorance. That's what I represent. And I'm very comfortable with that. A lot of people, they're trying to pretend like they know everything. And that's insane. That's completely insane. How could you possibly know everything? How could you possibly be well informed about even 10% of what's going on in the world? How could you possibly do that? And why are you trying to pretend like you know things that you don't know? This is futile.
Yeah, screws you up too. It screws you up because it's like you dig your own grave, really.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, because it just then reinforces, it keeps reinforcing your ignorance, right? Because you can never ask a question. Yeah. So yeah, that's why I don't have any problem at all. And basically, there's no context in which I'm uncomfortable to ask a question. And I also don't care, if other people say, well, everybody knows that. Well, clearly they don't, because I'm one of everybody and I don't know it.
Yeah, odds are I'm not the unique exception.
Yeah. Even if I am, who cares?
Yeah.
I don't know what this is. Explain it to me. I mean,
yeah. Can we?
I don't know.
Answer my question. And can we move on?
Anyway, but really, like, this makes such a huge difference because it totally changes the way in which you interact with knowledge, and it also, you might find that it helps you update your knowledge on the spot in real time. Because again, if we think about that meeting where someone uses some phrase, you don't know what that means, or you use some insider lingo thing, you don't know what that means. Now, for the rest of the presentation, for the rest of the meeting, every time they refer to that thing, you don't know what's going on, right? Yeah. And instead, you can update your knowledge on the spot and then actually extract more information out of the rest of that meeting.
Yeah, that's something that's this is the point that it's really helped my social life and my intimate relationship with my partner too. Is like, I used to have this horrific habit where if someone starts telling me a story, I'll zone out because either I'm not particularly interested in what they're telling me or whatever, but I'll act like I am because I feel like I've got to be polite or something. I do this with practically everybody. It was debilitating socially. It's just like, I just got to be, okay, yeah, I agree. I'll just like, I'll nod and smile and shit. And then I just dig my own hole here because
the longer it goes,
the longer it goes on, the longer I let this happen. And I'm just like praying that they don't ask me a question or an opinion on something. It's like, oh, what do you think about what they did? Yeah, it's just shit. Yeah. It's just...
oh, damn. And
so unpleasant. And then it'd be like, what do you mean it's shit? It's like, well, and then it gets even worse.
Yeah.
So that happened often. So at one point I decided that, you know what? And I think it was learning communication skills in my counselling course that really helped me with that. It's just like, look, if a client starts talking to you about something you don't understand, you don't know, it's your professional responsibility to make sure that you know what they're talking about and whereabouts they are. Doesn't matter how many times you've got to ask the question. Yeah. So I started applying this to my social life too, and things got way better. And I was navigating social interactions with just much less angst, I think. Yeah. It's just even if my girlfriend's been talking for 20 minutes and I went off the rails 5 minutes ago, I would just say, listen, I haven't really been listening to you for the past 5 minutes. I understand this bit and this bit and this bit, but for some reason I just zoned out. Can you tell me, or is it even worth it? And they're like, yeah, it is worth it. Or you'd be like, oh, never mind, it's not a big deal. And basically, none of the bad things happen. Yeah. Like, I used to think, like, if I didn't understand what was going on, they'd be like, you don't understand me. You're not listening. You don't think I'm in. And I'm just like, oh, God. None of that ever happens. Yeah. And it wouldn't happen the other way either. If someone says, oh, Ollie, can you just repeat that, please? I'd be like, sure. I mean, if I was talking for half an hour, I'd be like, no, I'm not. But, like, if it was just a little, what do you mean by that?
No,
like, okay.
I think it's good that you bring that up because that's also something I noticed, like, when someone I don't know asks you, oh, remember this thing that I told you about, and you're like, oh shit, I don't remember. I understand that's like, I'd rather be able to tell you, yes, of course I remember, but it's way worse if I pretend like I remember the thing and then you start going off on a tangent on it, and I still don't know what the fuck is going on. It just gets worse.
It gets worse, and you can't contribute anything. You're just
Yeah.
in your own head thinking, "Oh fuck, what have I done? I've got into a situation here."
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Because I think I have that sometimes where people will, you know, they will have told me something and it takes me a moment to remember and to get context and stuff. And I've also made a habit of just being like, hold on, no, can you,
Yeah.
I don't remember. Can you just start telling me about it? And then probably as soon as you start, I'm like, oh, that thing. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, exactly. I think it comes down to just general authenticity as well. It's like, look, you don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And if you're acting like you know what they're talking about, then you're basically acting out a lie in behavior. You know?
Yeah.
Just nodding. What you nodding for? What's the
Yeah,
nod about?
yeah.
You don't have a fucking clue what they're talking about.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, you don't really want to be that person, probably.
No, it's way more socially freeing, and you enjoy interactions more too when you haven't got to just put up this facade.
Yeah, so that's a great point. So that's another huge benefit of asking questions, like shamelessly, and yeah, revealing your ignorance shamelessly. But also, I want to say that not only do the negative things not come to pass that you imagine, I think it very often it will make you, it's more likely that you'll, in a professional context, you'll find yourself becoming like a key team player, because like you're the only person asking good questions, basically. And it's just, and also people like when someone talks to you or someone explains to you something and you ask genuine questions for clarification, that makes it clear that you're actually paying attention and people feel seen and understood and so on, right?
Exactly.
Like there's actually loads and loads of benefits that come from this.
Yeah, and you're coming into contact with the reality of the situation as well through just the simple little questions. You're reaffirming your understanding. It improved my relationships big time and I know one of the reasons why I know that this happened is because I can recall details of a person's situation even when they're not around. Like for instance, if someone talked to me about a work situation they're going through, I can think about it and recall it when they're not around or the following day. Or if another conversation with someone else reminds me of something they said, I'm like, oh yeah, so this is a similar situation to what they were going through. And if we contrast that with how I used to navigate things socially, I wouldn't really fully know. I wouldn't be able to recall little details. I wouldn't really necessarily care that much about it because I didn't get a full understanding. But by just asking these little questions, it's like, what's his name? What does he do at your work? Why does he piss you off? Okay, It's like that ingrains itself in my mind more. And I feel like, and it's the basis for connection because I feel like I'm actually getting a real strong window, a real look into the way this person sees things and where they think and whatnot. And it just, if we contrast that with like just smiling and nodding and whatnot, it's night and day. Yeah,
it makes a huge, huge difference. And it's also the reason we're also mentioning this in the long game, right? Is because the only way this works is as a long-term habit. If you try to do this a bit more for 2 weeks or whatever, okay, you might experience a couple of interesting things, but the real benefit comes from becoming the person who just does that. And the way it changes how you understand the world and your relationships and so on over the long term, right? So that's why it's a long game thing to do. Now, when it comes to asking questions, we kind of already touched on this. Like the other aspect to this, right? Revealing your ignorance is the first one. The second one is like follow your curiosity. So where it's basically I think that the problem that we can run into is that we believe things for very flimsy reasons, or we just accept, someone says, hey, you should do this. Oh, okay. And you believe that and you do that because one person told you to, right?
All right.
And in fact, many of our beliefs are very flimsy like that. Maybe some authority figure told you something or you just kind of picked it up from the cultural context. And so you do things, you act in ways and you believe things that you've never actually questioned, you've never actually gone deeper on that. And it's really useful to develop a habit of just asking these deeper questions of going, hold on, why is that? How does that work? How are these two connected? What is the source of this, right? These kinds of questions where you're following your curiosity instead of just accepting something at face value. Again, if we go with the nutrition example, right? If someone says, hey, eat more fat, it's healthy. Instead of just going, oh, okay, this guy in a lab coat said fat is healthy, I'm going to believe that now. You go, hold on, why is it healthy compared to what? Like, what are you basing this on, right? these kinds of questions, following that curiosity, because it's also, so first of all, you're more aware of your ignorance. So you're like, how do I contextualize this? How do I figure out whether eating fat is healthy or not? And that curiosity, then you follow that with questions.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah. So the nutrition thing is a great example, because you can do that instantly. Like if anyone makes a health claim, you can just keep asking, why a few times, and then that will lead you to, because it's just mind-boggling to me how people would read an article, which is basically an opinion piece, like, I did this diet, it worked for me, therefore da da da, and then no one checks the references or sources or anything, or that's assuming they're even in the article. But you can do that quite easily. It's why I love the website Healthline. Healthline is great, man. That's such a great website. Just because whenever they make a claim, boom, here's how we know.
Yeah,
and you can follow it that way.
Yeah, which is also like having like this kind of standard of, hey, tell me the source, man. Don't tell me stuff without telling me the source. And that's also something that I have to say, like, to me, this is a huge factor when reading a book. Again, like if we talk about nutrition, right? It's just, I got used to reading books where every single factual claim is backed up with at least one study. And then when you read a book that just makes a bunch of claims and there's no footnote, you're just like, what am I supposed to do with it? I'm just going to believe you, That doesn't make any sense.
It's basically saying, trust me.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't know me.
Yeah. So, another favorite example I have of this is like a lot of self-development books do this, where they have like this pseudo neuroscientific lingo, where it says, when you do this activity, it lights up your prefrontal cortex. It's like, okay, what does that mean?
So does talking.
So does talking. Yeah, it's like exactly. It's like, hold on, how does that help me? The prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, this and that. It's like, okay, you're throwing around these neuroscience words, but how is this helping me?
Yeah.
It makes it, and I think often it's just made to lend credibility to a claim, because all you're saying is, when you do a region in your brain lights up. Okay, fine. It's like, so there's activity in my brain when I do the thing. I already knew that,
No one's surprised by that.
Yeah. So, and there's quite a lot of that. And basically then asking these questions like, okay, well, what's the significance of this? What's the significance of this brain region? And what is this test anyway? When you say it lights this or it activates this part of it, what does that mean actually? And yeah, how does this compare to, whatever, eating chips or driving a car or something like that, right? And these questions will actually lead you to, well, sometimes it leads you to someone else's ignorance, right?
Yeah.
But even that is useful then to know, right? To know the limits of someone else's knowledge too. And yeah, also the kind of thing where, it says studies show that such and such. Well, what studies? How many?
Well, scientists say.
Yeah, scientists. Like, really?
Scientists disagree on everything, man.
Yeah.
Which scientists say that and which ones don't?
Yeah, and so this kind of thing, or also, another example is when you see, this is also typical like sensational thing, where it's like, oh, people who ate whatever had double the rate of this cancer. It's like, okay, what's the base rate? Because if like 0.01% of the people get this cancer, then double that is 0.02%, which is a very different story than a jump from 10 to 20%,
Yeah. Yeah, true. Well, this reminded me of something that came up last night, actually. So Ryan published a new video to his channel, and in one of his, it's like on nasal breathing, and he mentioned breath work on one of the points, and then someone commented on his channel saying, don't do breath work, it is demonic, it causes demonic possession. So Dean apparently was a bit bored when, you know what, I'm going to debate with this woman. It's like, then he asked, why do you believe that? What's the thing? And she linked him to an unlisted YouTube video with over 250,000 views, 31-minute video, really well made, talking about how, and it's basically created by Christians. The website is like reasonsforjesus.com.
Yeah. And
then the whole video is just like these studies after study after study about like meditation being linked with psychosis and schizophrenic disorders and all this other stuff, right? And yeah, like Dean was sort of formulating an argument with it, sort of saying, listen, correlation doesn't equal causation and stuff. And that led me to read of something else, and this is why it reminded me. There was a study done to determine the sort of negative impact of meditation. And I think it was the University of Minnesota or something. And it was like 2,500 participants. And basically all they did was they assessed the, meditators versus the control group, non-meditators. And they found that, okay, would meditation cause schizophrenia or psychosis or anything like that? And would there be more occurrence of this in the meditating group versus the non-meditating group? They found that no, that if you just do nothing, if you just don't meditate, then a group of, say, 1,250 people there can be way more chances of someone getting psychotic and schizophrenic just because people are like that,
Yeah, you'll just, in a large enough group, stuff will happen.
Yeah, in a large enough group with just don't do anything, there'll just be these occurrences that happen. So it was just a really interesting. It's interesting we're talking about this now because this came up last night and I dug a little bit deeper because the potential negative impacts of meditation are something that fascinate me too. It's like,
yeah, and it's also like it's totally legit for someone to, the demonic possession thing is like, okay, well, you'll have to produce some really extraordinary evidence for this, but it's totally legit to question that. I think it's totally legit, even though like we just talked about, extolling the virtues of meditation. But it's an absolutely legit question to ask, hold on, is this all bullshit? Is this doing harm? Like, yes, let's find out. And that's also the merit of asking these questions, is to basically no question is off the table, right? And no question is not allowed, right?
I had to applaud the woman that commented that, to be honest. I mean, she's like demonic possession and that stuff I'm not on page with. But the fact that she was, she was questioning this stuff anyway, because if you think about meditation now, it's just non-stop positive, mindfulness. But she was like, no, actually, I've dug a little bit deeper. Maybe
that's the problem is that it's just you're just countering with more unfounded conviction, and this is why what I'm talking about is asking questions.
Yeah,
and really following your curiosity, because you can always find someone who will be convinced of whatever position you want to hold. There's going to be some charismatic dude with a YouTube channel, who makes it sound reasonable and true and stuff.
Fair.
So, and it's again like making this habit of going. This is why it's in two parts. The first thing is you have to train yourself to be aware of your ignorance, and then chasing down your curiosity with questions and seeing where it leads you. And of course, you could say, well, okay, hold on, that sounds like a lot of work, right? Am I going to apply this to just everything in my life? It seems a bit difficult. And I think that's true. But it's especially like this ability becomes more important the bigger the size of decisions you're making based on your knowledge or lack of knowledge. It's like if I tell you, hey, Ollie, miso soup is the healthiest thing in the world, and then you start eating a bowl of miso soup every week, and you don't like chase down every single study on the topic first. Well, but what's the worst that can happen? It's soup, It's like, it's probably not going to do any harm. So even if you made this decision to start eating miso soup just because someone told you, it's like, well, the total downside of that is probably negligible, right?
So the higher the stakes get,
the
more questions you should be asking, ideally.
Because if you think about life decisions, like how many people take out a massive loan to buy a home because everyone just tells them, real estate is always a good investment. Real estate always goes up, always goes up. Well, you might be really, really screwed because you didn't go, hold on, why? How does it always go up? How does that work? How is it always a safe investment?
Yeah.
If you don't, it's really good to go, hold on, I don't know anything about real estate. And before I just make a huge decision, with like potentially life-ruining amounts of money on the line, maybe I should learn a bit more about this, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's where, you want to be practicing this, revealing your ignorance and asking questions, like following the trail of questions in your everyday life, because every once in a while it matters in a huge way. And this actually brings me back to the investing example I gave. If you talk to a financial advisor or you start looking up saving and investing and stuff, the exact thing I showed with 7% interest, you'll find this. God, there's so many versions of this and so many books and videos and everywhere, right? Where the idea is always to put it in a safe investment, basically an index fund, and you get an average of 7%. And it's just like, hold on. If I just hear someone say this and it seems like, oh, this seems like a great idea, I should do this. This is one of those things, man. This is your financial destiny. Let's ask a few questions about this. Because also like, okay, 7%, what does that mean? 7% on average, what does it mean? Where does this extra money come from? First of all, you should understand where this comes. Why do I have more money in this account, right? Where did that come from?
Yeah, but if you want to believe it, then you're not going to ask as many questions, are you? Because you don't want to be proven wrong. You want to believe that you're going to get these steady returns.
Exactly. And there are some questions that are very important to ask there, which is also like I said, do you understand the mechanism by which you have more money in your account? What happens when there's like a recession or a depression? What happens? What are the fees? You know, well, you're telling me I'm going to make 7% a year. Sounds great, but do I pay taxes on that? How much? What are the fees here? What is the brokerage charging me for this? Right? And you might find that at the end of that, it's really not much left, right?
Yeah.
And then, where does this 7% number come from? Oh, it's like, okay, historically, the last 70 years. Yeah, okay, so if something's happened for the last 70 years, does that mean it's going to happen for the next 70 years? If I have a lump sum, should I invest it all at once or should I dollar cost average? How does investing money in this thing, right? So there's whatever the financial advisor is saying, here's our investment portfolio mix. Well, how does investing in this compare to investing in something else? Maybe, real estate or maybe whatever else, right? And unless you ask these different questions, unless you get to a point where you really understand what you're doing, then you might end up making a pretty ruinous decision, or you might end up missing out on a lot of opportunity. And again, so things like that, I think when it comes to that kind of thing, decisions like longer term decisions, like anything where you get into debt for your education or for a house or something like that, anything, career choices, relationships, and long-term financial decisions, right? That can make huge, huge difference. These are things where the decisions you make now lead to massively different outcomes 10, 20, 30 years down the line. And that is basically, I think all of these things, right? If you make a habit of like cultivating your mind by reading books the way we talked about, by meditating and by asking questions, it's almost like a compounding effect on top of a compounding effect, because you become better and better at making truly good decisions and understanding what's going on, and you're not just kind of a victim of life in a way, right? Whereas things are just happening to you and you're like, oh crap, I wish someone had told me,
Yeah.
So that is the idea of playing the long game, which, like I said, is kind of a core principle. It's one of those things, man. It's one of those things. If you can become someone who does this habitually, who's good at playing the long game, which is, which also involves foregoing present gains for greater future gains. And that's quite difficult to do, right?
Yeah.
But if you get good at doing this, it's like, damn, this is a life hack. This is a real life hack.
It's also kind of zigging where other people are zagging as well.
Totally, yeah. Because what everybody wants, obviously, myself included, by the way, is just the immediate thing, please.
Lots of money now.
I just like to wake up to like a few $1 billion in my bank account, and then I'm like, oh, I don't have to worry about all this shit anymore.
Yeah.
So if that's an option that I haven't been told about yet, hook me up.
Yeah. I mean, I'd still make a podcast. There's a kind of a reaffirming thing. If I woke up with a few $1 billion, I'd still want to make a podcast episode.
I honestly wonder if I just want more still, but I don't know. But I would also still do a podcast. But actually, talking about that specifically, I'm like almost worried about waking up to $1 billion in my bank account because they're printing so many of these damn things, right? And there's like printing so much money. Eventually, they're just going to airdrop it into people's account. Please take some of this paper money.
It's got no value anymore.
Yeah, so
it's
actually,
taking up too much space.
Yeah, so actually I'm kind of worried about that scenario. I'd rather not wake up to $1 billion in my account. That would be a bad sign.
Yeah, I can't say I share the same anxiety around that idea. But, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, it's how money changes people. Or maybe it doesn't. That fellow in the UK won the lottery. He was a gypsy fellow who just fucking rid around on motorbikes before that. Bought a bunch of motorbikes with it, a few caravans, ditched them, whatever, and then eventually within like a few years he was just broke again.
Yeah,
like,
this is what most people manage to lose it all again, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean that's a topic for another podcast for sure. Like with the money situation specifically, right? It's like there's a very big difference between having a lot of money and having enough money.
Yeah.
There's often no overlap between the two.
Well, I was researching this recently because I've always had this sort of idea in my mind that I don't really care about money. But then there is a correlation between money and happiness quite substantially to a point.
Yeah.
I think it's somewhere around the ballpark, depending on what study you look at, is $60,000 US.
Yeah. So
when your basic needs are met, but then that there isn't a correlation between more money and more happiness in that.
Yeah.
But from 0 to 60,
less money than that.
Less money than that, like substantially less money than that, it becomes a real problem.
Totally.
60K also means you don't really worry about the stress of not having money in the future and stuff, and you're putting some money away, and you just can feel a bit better about the future.
Yeah, you have like that comfort. Although again, like that's, 60K 2 years ago. What's that now? What do you need now to have the same buying power? I don't know. It's more than 60K.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I say this now is because I've always had this, like, when I think of money, I'm not motivated by it.
Yeah.
But recently I've been really sort of looking at that with fresh eyes again. And it's like, well, let's make some cheddar.
We'll definitely have some more episodes about money, even though for me as well, it's like I'd rather just not deal with money at all. But,
I'd rather deal in like, hey mate, I got some potatoes that I grew in my garden.
Like bartering.
Yeah, you've got some wine that you made.
Yeah,
potatoes for wine. That seems like a good deal.
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, no, it's like, I hope we manage to make it to a post-monetary society at some point. But yeah, I'm not a fan of money. But
on the village, we'll grow veg.
We'll make it happen. Yeah, but in the world we live in, I'd rather have huge amounts of money. And that's kind of the problem, right? That's like the problem. It's like for a long time I had enough. I just had enough. I didn't need much. But now I'm like, no, you know what? I want huge amount. I want stupid amounts of money.
Yeah. I'm starting to get on the same page. It's taken a while to adjust and to update. Because I've had a negative association with it.
Maybe it's a bad influence on you.
Maybe,
you were like this free-floating hippie type.
Free-floating hippie thought that, what?
You're turning into a greedy shark.
Yeah. I'm turning into fucking Dan Penn. Like, I just go from one extreme to the other. Yeah. I'm like a hippie. Like, oh, no, everything's all right. I don't need money. Now the next I'm like, I want to make all the money. And I want to take it from people, even if I have to. You know what I mean? I don't care what I need to do.
Yeah. You'll have to start wearing suits with high collars.
Yeah, it's not waving a gun around. If you don't understand the reference, just check out. Man. Actually, no, I'm not sending people to Dan Peña's fucking stuff.
But let's put it. We could put a link to like a CoffeeZilla Dan Peña thing. Maybe.
Yeah, Mike Winnett's channel.
Yeah,
on Dan Peña. You pay him $30,000. You go to his fucking castle in Scotland, and he'll just wave a gun at you, telling you to shoot yourself. It's like, well, this is $30,000 well spent for this retreat.
Yeah, good stuff. Anyway, so that's a tangent. Let's wrap it up here. Thank you for listening, and if you're listening to this on iTunes, it would be awesome if you could leave a review. You can leave a rating and a review somehow.
Leave a 5-star review.
Yeah.
If you thought that the quality of this podcast was 1 star, then don't worry about it. Don't worry about going to iTunes and leaving that review.
You don't have to tell us.
You don't have to tell us. We don't have to. You don't have to leave a review. Is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
You can do something else if you want.
All right. See you in the next one.
See you next one, guys. Take care.